Good evening and welcome to another art stream with myself, Pharaoh. And today we are looking at Interwar Art at the Royal Academy 1922. Hope you have been enjoying the series so far. Feedback so far has been good, so thank you very much for your lovely, kind messages. I have brought the mic closer to my face in an attempt to sound louder. Hopefully that will work. I've got to tell you, this year is going to be quite short compared to some of the others. For some reason, 1922 just didn't capture me in the same kind of way. Not as much new stuff. I would even go so far to say only really one or two standout pieces. Normally there's, I would say, 4 or 5. But you get what you're given. And I think let's make a start through the work. We're going to kickstart with this interesting portrait, and it's by Arthur Cope, and it's of Field Marshal the Duke of Connaught. So just to kind of give a little bit of an intro to Cope himself, I would sort of describe him as like one of the RA's bread and butter portrait guys. He often does like high society members, as we'll talk about in a second when we hear about it. Connaught in a second. Relatively old. He, entering Royal Academy schools about 1874. In general, I'm not that keen on Cope's work. I often find it to be a little bit flat. I mean, okay, it's a good painting. It's a good painting. Lovely. Again, Sargent-esque in its kind of layout, a lot of detail, a lot of interest. But I would say most of his work is it's like good, but never great. This is definitely one of his better ones, but I wanted to include a piece of his as part of this work. So in my mind, it's still not stand out. I mean, it's difficult. I think we have to ask the question: what is the purpose of the portrait in general? Is it all about this? I think one of the most overword words when discussing portraiture is the word essence. This has been popularized by I've forgotten his name now. The cross-dressing artist Grayson Perry. There we go. And he often talks about the portrait is about capturing the essence of the man, and it's like I think there is some fundamental truth to that. Portraiture is about uncovering something within the person, trying to capture a sense of who they are. But I think there's multiple facets as well. I think it's about capturing a moment in time. It's about trying to generate something interesting out of not a lot. In some ways, it's one of the most stripped back form and or types of painting, because yes, you can do a bit of stuff with the background, but it's just all about the person. So thinking about posing, thinking about what the hand's doing, the kind of hand business, etc. Very, very important. And often I feel like it's not necessarily the painter's fault that the portrait's bad, because not everyone's a model. I'm not just talking about in terms of looks, but in terms of pose and in terms of what's there behind the eyes as well. And often I think Cope ends up with quite a few dull individuals, and that's reflected in his work as well, unfortunately. However, this was definitely one of his better ones. And Connaught's interesting because he himself is one of Queen Victoria's children. He is the 7th child or the 3rd son. I mean, that's got to be a rum gig, hasn't it? Let's be honest here, like right down the pecking order. But he did eventually manage to kind of wind up as governor of Canada for a period. So shout out to all the Canucks in chat and listening. The actual piece itself, I think, really manages to capture a sense of nobility and purpose. You can feel that kind of royalty coming through. It's an interesting posture because it looks like there's almost like a bit of contrapposto with the legs. He's got him looking three quarters. He's holding the rod of authority again. So again, it's all about the paraphernalia, the symbology of, you know, the symbology of power, but also he's holding onto his sword as well. You know, certainly in his mind, he is not afraid of the hard forms of power at the same time. But I think most captivating of all is the expression on the face. And again, I think I had a look at some images of Connaught. It's always worth comparing like photography and portraiture. And again, it 100% shows in my mind why a portrait will forever be better than a photograph, because the photograph, um, it doesn't capture an image like the human eye does. It's hard to explain. Again, with all of the fancy equipment, I've never seen a sunrise as good on a photograph as I have done in real life. There's again, maybe it's just the frequencies of light are missing in the paper or something, but there is a definite difference. And the same thing with portraiture. You know, the portraiture, yes, it sort of fills in the gaps a little bit. You know, it sometimes adds a bit of polish and slims down and brings out some of the features, but also I do think it manages to capture something that you would only see in person. So that's why I feel like it always has a place. I feel like good portraiture is kind of like a lost art of the day, in my opinion. But we've really caught who he is in this moment. He's got great poise, great posture. Um, his eyes not fully open. There's a kind of a kind of a laziness to them. Almost maybe he's sort of almost looking down to us, but also I think a determination at the same time. It's also quite confrontational, and I quite like that about it. You know, it's a strong male portrait, something that is often lost nowadays. So, nice little piece from Cope here. Nothing too mind blowing, like I said, but I appreciated it as well. So, okay, let's switch across to the next one, which is here, and this is another Glyn Philpott. So, if you remember, we've seen Philpott in his first painting do the kind of Dutch master realism thing. Then he switched across to kind of more symbolist work. We have him with some of his realist stuff, and again, I think that's what's one of the areas that are in my mind that is interesting with Philpott, because he has the ability to paint in different styles and can switch between them very easily. You know, there was a big debate in the world of design between Walter Crane and Lewis Day, who are two, like Crane is just like amazing guy, polymath. He helped create the Arts and Crafts Society, but Crane would only draw in one style, while Day would always just like he would produce works in Gothic, in classical, in arts and crafts, or what, you know, whatever the client commissioned. And there's an interesting question: should an artist, you know, I think most today we often think of the artist locked into a specific style, but actually quite a few artists would vary around. You know, think about Thomas Chippendale, for example. If you have a look through the Cabinet Maker's Director, which is kind of like a catalogue of all of his work. He sells chairs in, I guess, the standard Georgian classical, but he also sells Gothic chairs. He also sells chinoisiere chairs as well. So the artist as multiple styler is interesting, and Philpott is definitely one of those guys, and I like that, and I like that he also works parallel all through his artistic career, because he's releasing like these kind of more like Dutch master realist works in combination with his more symbolic and abstract pieces at the same time, which is something, for example, like we know, for example, Picasso, uh, he was great at being able to, you know, he had the ability to paint in multiple styles, but he sort of had his phases, if that makes sense. So his style was always evolving. Anyway, let's turn to the piece itself. You know, this is no, this is the Sisters of the Artist. So if you saw the previous painting, there was two brothers and the mother. Shows he's from a big family. One thing I forgot to mention about Philpott, which is interesting, is that he's homosexual, but he also converted to Catholicism relatively early on in his life, around about 20. And so that's why there are these kind of strange, like he sort of, I didn't say he lived this double life, but obviously he had this life on the edge of society in his private life, but also was a man of deep faith and theologically minded at a time. This is really one of the low points of the Christianity. We often think about today as being like a real low point of Christianity. Certainly in England, it really comes in waves. And like the 20s and 30s, there was a lot, especially in the elite class. Very few people really believed in God in a deep meaning. But Philpott, I would say, is one of those, and he does keep returning back to the theological. So we've got the picture of his sisters. It's, I guess you could say, it's almost a portrait in some ways. We've got one sitting on this kind of large sofa, and the other on a small poof. They're sitting next to each other, but they're at different heights. They're looking in different directions. There's different kind of feelings. The sister on the left here, there's obviously a bit more reserve. She's kind of gazing out carelessly into the distance here, and her dress is this kind of dark black with a bit of a ruff going on here as well. But that's kind of in keeping with like Edwardian. It feels a little bit out of style, if I'm honest with you, by the 20s. And look at these. You've got these nervous hands across there. She's not really sure of herself. The sister, I'm going to say this is the younger sister here. She's again more confrontational. She's in this beautiful pink dress, and she's looking straight at the viewer here. So again, you feel the kind of youth, the freshness, the confidence, and also kind of the relevance. So I wonder whether Philpott is playing these two things up about innocence versus experience here, age versus youth, etc. But look, I think a nice piece in terms of the colours. This, when I say it's old master, I mean look at the the browns used. It's about chiaroscuro again, the kind of lightness of the individuals combined with the deep darkness of the actual work itself. Browns, pinks, yellows, and kind of like muddy greens in there as well. It's a very tight color palette. It's almost kind of mono in some ways, but yeah, I think a nice portrait. Again, Philpott's work, in my mind, the symbolic always trumps the realist, but still kind of interesting here. Okay, we've got a landscape here from an artist we haven't seen before. This is from Adrian Stokes. So we talked about young artists coming into the RA. Adrian is our first 20-year-old, finally, 23 when he exhibited this piece here. And Stokes, I would say, because of his age, he is really on like the last ebb of this kind of landscape movement going on. He's also really known for a lot of his writing. Someone described him, I saw, as the most eloquent and poetic English art critic since John Ruskin. I have to admit, I've never seen his works, but maybe I'll have to take a look after this stream. But I think a really nice piece of work here from Adrian here, and it's the Villeneuve-les Avignon. In terms of style, again, it's a little bit of a mix, really. It's got some of this kind of harsher graphic style at the front here, but then as you kind of go to the background, sorry, there is more of a haziness. And I think it gives you that kind of definite feeling that you're kind of rooted in place. You're getting some of the detail on the rocks there and the kind of lichen and moss growing on top, or seaweed or whatever it is. And then the castle in the background has this kind of light impressionistic detail to it that it almost feels like a bit of a mirage. It's kind of fading into the background. And that's kind of bolstered by the kind of illusion, this little hint of illusion here in the water. which has been done really, really nicely. In terms of color palettes, it's like the classic yellow, yellow and blue, really, with just pushing to green occasionally, pushing to red in a few different areas. But again, I'd say a really tight color palette. There's something soothing and calming about it. Really lovely piece. We'll see a few others of Adrian's as we kind of go through. Okay, another new artist here. We've got Augustus John. Now, I think John is probably one of the more familiar artists people, born in 1878. That makes him about 47 by the time he's doing this. Now, John is famous for, I would say, being like a significant figure, both from a painting perspective, but also in terms of his character and also his style. So I'll just read this little bit about him here. After injuring his head diving into the sea while on holiday in Pembrokeshire in 1897, he became a dramatically changed figure, described by Wyndham Lewis as a man of great action into whose hands the fairies had placed a paintbrush instead of the sword. He grew a beard and became the very image of the unpredictable Bohemian artist. And I quite like that Tonks had this kind of Damassarian moment stylistically. And again, if you see his early work, it is just like they say, it's very, very structured, very, very rigid. He was a notoriously good draftsman, trained at the Slade, and could really render a figure nicely. But we see him in his kind of post accident mode here as being very, very loose with the brush here, even beyond the impressionism itself. I would say, it's super light, super structured as well. Like to say it's like a cubist work is obviously not right at all. But if you look at some of these kind of shadow blocks here, he's using like a wide square flat end brush to create lots of kind of square and boxy figures and shapes. Look at the lines of the coat, again, just hinted at through the various shadows, but it's giving a lot of sense of strength, but also this kind of blocky feel. Same with the background here. He's added in these kind of thin lines. The background itself is like almost like an abstract painting here. And I forgot to mention that the sitter here is, of course, Bernard Shaw, the famous playwright. And I think this is a really nice painting from Augustus John. In general, I have to admit, I'm not that keen on him. You know me by now that I like a tight render. I like a more of a graphic style. But John does so well with his kind of color blocking and his color choices that it instantly fools the eye here. So again, like you can see the kind of these rosy cheeks of Bernard Shaw, his gouty face. I mean, if you think that he was very, like, his biggest works were during the Edwardian period, so this is kind of like him in later life, but he was obviously working quite like well into the 30s even. But you can see his kind of big red nose. His features are almost exaggerated. The head itself, whether this is a stylistic choice or an effect caused by all of these kind of lines that he's built up in the picture, it feels quite a long head. But again, so I think there's almost something of a bit of the caricature about it as well. But if you kind of zoom out, if you kind of move away from the screen, just stand up, walk away from the screen, and you can see all those little color blocks that we're looking at up close blend in perfectly. Every single one has its place, and it shows John's understanding of light and color to create such a complicated piece that really works well. This is modernism at its best here. Okay, time for something completely different. Sargent, much referenced, little shown so far in the work, and we've got his first piece. Like I said, Sargent was definitely very old and tired at this point. Born 1856, so he's not even like the oldest boy who's exhibiting, but he's definitely one of the older. How old is he? 60, 66 at this point, but he only died a couple of years later. So not only is this towards the end of his career, but also I get the impression he's kind of like a little bit burnt out, if I'm honest with you. I'm still amazed he like him during World War One is genuinely interesting because he was super keen to get involved. Like he wasn't initially commissioned, but then pushed hard to get some commissions and even dropped his rate down to get shown. So I think in his head, he felt like World War One. This was going to be his like crowning achievement in his life, and he did the gas painting that I mentioned beforehand. But this is another absolute classic piece, which is the general officers painting. So this is basically the way that they set up the war is they had their kind of like HQ room where everything was coordinated from, and these were the officers featured inside there. Now, again, my World War knowledge is terrible, but I only know Haig, who we saw from the Orpen painting previously, and French across here, his arch nemesis. They're both holding the Rod of Authority. I mean, love French's coat. French supposedly had like so many different outfits. He had like his tailor in Savile Row, constantly bringing his different outfits. There's one fact for you that all of these officers had to get their own uniforms made, and so they were all made individually. And big brands like Burberry would actually make some of these officer uniforms. Hence the Burberry trench coming out of the First World War. But French in particular was a bit of a fop and a womanizer at that as well. Now to do this, I believe that Sargent got all of the posers to pose individually. He then did individual drawings and portraits for them, and you can still see some of them. And then he kind of mashed them together in this larger piece. Now I have to be honest with you, in looking digitally, you can tell that he's kind of mapped everything together. He's tried really hard to kind of keep the light sources at a similar level, but you can just tell that this is a bit of a patchwork piece. Having seen this painting many times up close, however, you really can't tell, I think, in the same kind of way, partly because if this piece is flipping huge and you're kind of looking, often it's placed a bit higher up here, you're sort of licking the boots of the officers here, looking up. And I have to say, this is one of my favourite First World War themed paintings, one of my favourite Sargent paintings as well, because it's, large portraits like this, it's very difficult. The most successful one, of course, is going to be like the Night Watch, which again has been allowed to have so much there's a lot of playfulness to it. There's lots of little different vignettes and little moments and motifs inside there. It's difficult pulling a large group of people together, and also all of the various, like, I'm sure the Night Watch wasn't too bad because it's just kind of like rich merchants who are happy to get their portrait done, while a lot of the officers were kind of like quite grumpy old men, quite frankly, and so this was a bit of a hassle for them. And also there's all the kind of egos and envy, I bet there was a big argument about who should sit in the center. Should it be Haig or should it be French? And I bet French wanted to be in the center, but then Sargent's placed French in front of Haig at the same time. So there's that kind of playoff between the two. All of that being said, he's managed to create some brilliant cohesion there. That everyone is an individual. They've each got their own pose. There's individual character, but it feels like they're part of a collective body and a unit working together. And again, you have to see this painting in real life because there is a sense of awe seeing this. I was like in my 21 maybe when I first saw this in real life, and it blew me away. It instantly captured me, and I didn't know anything about it at all. And you can stare at it for ages, and there's something you can feel the heroism of this man. Agree. You can have your opinions on World War One. I definitely have mine, but there is no doubt that these were masters of their craft, masters of war, and very powerful men at the same time, and it reaches through the ages to you. So this little picture, I think, doesn't do it justice, but a great piece from Sargent here. Definitely one of the better ones from an otherwise slightly dull year. Okay, fine. Next piece from Orpen here, Sir Charles Vilters Stanford, and this is our kind of second Orpen piece, I believe, so far. Again, I would say Orpen is probably the greatest male portraitist of all time, basically, because I think men are fundamentally harder to kind of draw from because they're a little bit colder, a little bit more reserved in these kind of settings. So it's hard to kind of pull the threads out. Now, Orpen's managed to position Sir Charles in a very interesting way, put him on a seat, 3/4, but then with the legs folded at the same time across there. So they're even despite you've got Charles here in this kind of pomp and circumstance, this kind of funny robe. I don't know whether it's part of his office or whatever. But you've got the juxtaposition of the formality of the robe with this kind of more casual pose. The hands on his legs is very disarming. That's like a classic sign of familiarity and kind of friendship and openness at the same time. And even in the face, he is looking towards us, but there's a friendliness to him, compassion, but also some kind of schoolmaster authority at the same time. He reminds me of like my housemaster or something like that you would go to only when you're in desperate trouble, but would be helpful at the same time. Orpen's set him in this kind of black background, but then added a bit of depth by kind of showing the silk as well. So a nice a nice portrait. Orpen does like these more kind of open, casual style portraits as well. Like that's something I've noticed, where it's a little bit easier going, a little less confrontational. I mean, if we compare this with the pomp and circumstance of Copes here at the second, this is all puff, and this is all approachability and casualness at the same time. I mean, color wise, again, it's nice because it's got he's got the kind of a lot of depth from the blacks, but then also again the kind of lightness from this yellow, cream, and then red. It's a yellow black color scheme with a dash of red stuck in there. Okay, on to this piece by another new artist, Anning Bell. Now, Bell's kind of interesting because he spent some time in an architect's before, again, going off to Paris and Italy, but also did some sculpture with George Frampton. I've mentioned one of his nephews in one of the previous streams. But Frampton, again, in his own right, is, I would say, one of the top 3 new sculpture guys. So he's super important, George Frampton. So it's interesting he's got that connection. Now, Bell's interesting because, yes, he is an oil painter. Yes, he is a portrait painter, but he also does a lot of design work. So, for example, he did some of the mosaics in Westminster Cathedral, some stuff for the Houses of Parliament, some stained glass, some of the stained glass windows up in Manchester, and other kind of like decorative pieces. And we'll see some of the kind of things he's submitted. But interestingly, in my mind, this was the thing that kind of shone out to me for this year. In fact, what I'm actually going to do is to quickly just give me a second. I've got the color version of this, and I have the black and white. I'm just going to include the two because, again, I think he's made a bit of modifications to it from the original. Again, it's hard to tell. So, depending on the pigments and the way that people paint, sometimes you do get some natural fading. But this is a symbolist piece, really. Again, I would say of the Puvri arc, watchers at the sepulchre. And again, there's no context to this. I couldn't really find out much information about it, but I believe this is the women waiting outside Jesus's tomb. Now, again, I'm drawing deep from my biblical knowledge here, but obviously Jesus throughout his ministry said that he would die and rise again in 3 days, quite explicitly at several times, and apparently only the women remembered about this because they're the ones that came back. None of the disciples did, and so it's Mary was the first person to see him, and so I think it's either the moment before going inside or a moment of waiting. Again, maybe someone in chat can elucidate, but there's a couple of things here. We've got the tomb here on the left-hand side, but there is no stone in front of it, implying that it's either way before or after the resurrection. We've got our two female figures across here. There is an undoubted melancholy, but also a kind of a strong reserve, a strong form of toughness. I mean, resolve. Look at the face of the figure on the right hand side here, staring directly into the darkness of the tomb. The rest of the piece itself is fairly stripped back. Everything's thrown to the sides here, so it's mainly sky really, but the piece itself has this kind of interesting like vacant quality to it, which again maybe is tied into the vacant tomb or something like that. Maybe something around that. And the watchers kind of sit on in this kind of desolate landscape. So there is this kind of desolation, melancholy, and sadness. Now let's just look at the colours a second before we dive in any further. And you can see here that there is one thing with this. I'm not sure whether this is the original or not, because often there are several companies that do make copies of these paintings, so it's hard to tell, but they do tend to get the colors right, even if they can't paint their faces in the same kind of way. But from a color scheme, it's really like blue-gray, maybe with a hint of red here in the background as the kind of sun starts to rise up. So again, there is a pregnancy to this. There is waiting, but there's also something that's going to happen as well, which I quite like. Now, in terms of the actual figures themselves, you can see that something's happened to the figure on the right-hand side. Maybe Belle felt that the figure on the right was a little bit too austere and has sort of blended her away. But I really like this. It's a relatively simple piece, but some classic symbolist work, and nice to see this at the RA at this time. Okay, something quite different here. This time it's a portrait by Charlie Sim. Sim's not too young, really. I mean, you'd look at this kind of style and you think, oh, this must be the style of a relatively young guy, but he's born in 73, so that would make him 40, 48, 49 at this time. So I mean, still in his 40s. Now, Sims had a lot of success during the Edwardian period, but he actually lost his son in the First World War. Basically, he slowly started to lose his mind from the 20s, and I think he was basically kind of backed up by some of his friends, but his work quality starts to go a little bit wild, and it sort of culminates in one of the years that we'll see. So try and remember on to Charlie Sims, and you'll see him pop up later. But the actual style of this is kind of interesting, a little bit Renaissance-y really in terms of the layout, central figure, archers in the background, but there is this kind of realist quality to it. I mean, I have to be honest with you, I don't like the child across here. The pose or the face is kind of like sentimental, but the woman in the background, who's the Countess, it's really quite lovely. They've got Charlie's got her lying sitting on a stool, hand leaning, but then staring at us directly in between the two archways, and it's got this kind of intensity to it. It's got this kind of surreal quality, and I also like again some of the kind of business in the background here. The little vase here on the right hand side with the red flowers, the red which matches the kind of intense red in her lips and on her dress. So kind of like a little bit different, a little bit interesting from Charles Sims, and like we'll encounter him later. Now I've got another Lavery painting. I kind of mentioned that Lavery's still like he's a well-known portrait painter at this time. I still don't feel like he's hit his stride fully, but this was another decent painting. Again, I just quite like the kind of intensity of the sitter, staring directly at us. The kind of darkness of the actual painting itself. All we see is her face and neck, and this little hint of lace from the left hand across here. So, again, a nice piece from Lavery, nothing too special. So, Charles Shannon. Now we've seen a number of these style. We saw the Childhood of Bacchus. We saw some like a mermaid painting, I think, as well. And this is the next one, called the Golden Age. And maybe this kind of reminisces on, again, kind of Greco-Roman works. I mean, it's very 17th century neoclassical, a couple of manneristic elements to it at the same time. It's a very like trad piece. If you remember, he loves to have things hidden in the background, but also in plain sight. So I think it was in the Bacchus, he had the stags right in the middle. This time we've got this guy with a boat across here, and this is called the Golden Age. It's the Golden Age of what, though? I mean, you can see there's kind of the vines and the fruit hanging down, so there is this kind of abundance. There's this happiness. There's this intensity, and we've got this kind of Madonna figure across here on the right hand side, staring directly at us, nude, next to what looks like some kind of sleeping child at the same time. So again, kind of interesting. I mean, I'm not 100% sold on Shannon, but he's trying to do something interesting here, and definitely caught my attention when I was going through the book. Okay, we've got our first bit of sculpture for today, and this is one of my favorite artists of this period, a guy called Reed Dick, and sorry, I think it's William is his first name, and I would describe him as he sort of sits in a number of camps similar to Gilbert Bayes, in the fact that he is often associated with the new sculpture guys, but because he is a little bit later, he first showed at the RA at 1912. He's kind of like in that second generation of artists, but he also gets wrapped up very heavily with modernist sculpture, and specifically with Mestrovich out of everyone else. So he does do like your standard portraits. Reed Dick does some actually. Reed Dick is again maybe one of my favorite sculptural portraitists, but he does do these kind of interesting, more kind of modernist symbolic works. This piece is straight out of Mestrovich, in my opinion, but he makes it a little bit more more realist. Now, Mestrovich has this kind of, I just got describe it as like the alien head phase. This is definitely not the official term, but when you kind of see the pieces, all of his women are dressed in these kind of robes, but they've got these kind of like grotesque alien eggheads at the same time. Now, Rieddick's obviously drawing from that, but he combines that with some of the kind of Renaissance-y elements of the new sculpture to create this Madonna piece here. It's fully carved in marble. They've got her folded, and you know, anything that's clothed like this is fundamentally like a Gothic work, because it's about showing off detail and the intricacies of fabric and textile. So you can see her dress has all these kind of folds in it, but that also becomes part of the design. There is a pattern to it. Again, this is a good example of a child. This is, where do we go back here? This is just like sentimental rubbish here, while this is a genuine cute little chubby baby, and you can really feel the passion and love given by the mother to the child here. She's raising him up on his back with both hands, kissing the back of his neck. So we're capturing this nice, beautiful moment between mother and child, and yeah, beautifully carved. I love the intricacies and the details of it, but also this isn't what folds of clothes looks like. So this is where the kind of modernism really comes in. He is abstracting what the folds should look like and creating an almost ornamental effect out of it. So Rieddick, brilliant sculptor. He's got lots of stuff coming up, so keep an eye out for him. We have the usual Julius Olsen now at this point. He's been in every single one. This one is sorry, excuse me, everyone. The Clouded Moon. So again, this is bread and butter at this point, I think, from Olsen. Cornish coast, some kind of weather effect at the same time. But what I did like about it that made it kind of stand out a little bit more from previous pieces is the sea foam, is the roughness of the waves, it's the intensity of it, and the kind of little birds flying off, the mysterious dark shadows of the ships behind. So this is all about the kind of foams and the waves crashing to shore. Okay, another new sculptor here, and this is William Goscombe John. I describe him as the Welsh new sculpture guy, although again I think he sits in this kind of second generations with Rieddick and Bayes, where he doesn't he has the roots and training in new sculpture, but kind of pushes things in his own direction. He's born. I forgot to say that Rieddick is a Scot. Goscombe John is Welsh, born in Cardiff, and actually got to work with Rodin in Paris in the 90s. Now, in terms of his style, it's nothing really like Rodin at all. It's like, does he? I don't even think he keeps any of the kind of the dynamic elements of his work, but there is certainly a kind of an abstract nature to him in the way that he kind of renders things. We'll talk more about that in a second. But this is like one of our first portrait busts. John will be doing some kind of more Welsh-based sculpture later, so keep an eye out. This is from a woman called Evelyn, and yeah, it certainly caught my attention in terms of obviously the rendering of the face. It's very strong here, very beautiful. But again, it was the hair that really stood out to me. Fen de Villiers always says you never want to sculpt hair as is. It's like you got to think about the quality of the medium that you're sculpting in. And with clay, it's like if you're ever to make even like a thin sausage of clay, it looks more like I don't know, like a dreadlock rather than a follicle of hair. And so because of that, you will have to create hair in masses. And so you can see this is one mass here, it's a block. But then if you were just to have masses, it's not very interesting. So what you do is you start to subdivide the masses. So you can see this mass here, which is a big rectangle, has got a line cut in half, and he's sculpted out to give a bit of depth between the two sections. And then he's added a bit of business at the front here with some kind of light detailed brush as well. So there is a kind of playfulness to the figure, a youthful vigor and interest. And I thought this was a nice piece by John. Right, next one is another Maurice Griffenhagen piece. Now, I think we saw the Vision last time, really nice work. Another quite nice piece here. Now, the Shulamite I looked up, and it's in relation to the Song of Solomon. Gotta be honest with you, I haven't read songs that much in the past, but the Shulamite is referenced there. And basically, the Shulamite is one of Solomon's lovers, slash in his whatever his concubinal arrangements or whatever. So he's one of his many wives, and she's often kind of shouted out as being virtuous and brilliant and a wonderful lover to Solomon. And so this piece is kind of mysterious to me. There wasn't a verse when I read that stood out, but we've got this kind of female figure across here, trying to get past some guards, and they've stopped her and they're kind of exposing her neck. Maybe this is some of Solomon's troops first identifying her as this kind of pasty white beauty. You've got the contrast of the kind of olive-skinned hands of the guards with the white flesh of the Shulamite. Her pose is really interesting as well. You've got some contrapposto on the floor, but her head's being hoiked to the side across there, so it's a bit difficult. Again, it would be difficult to render for anyone else, but Griffenhagen has got a strong control over his ability there. And then I really like the kind of the background, the kind of the darkness of the night. In terms of the colors, it's all about oranges and blues and blacks, and then maybe white. So you can see this kind of like dark navy blue, which then goes into a light white here, and then the orange, the literal orange of the plants with the orange of her dress as well. It's kind of like a bit of historicism, really, but I think it's the rendering and some of the poses that make it a bit stand out and quite nice. Right, now for another J.J. Shannon, that wily American, and this piece is called Miss Torres, and I think he comes back to Torres a few times, but this was a really nice painting, I thought, by Shannon. There's something delicate about it. There's a vulnerability and a fragility to her. And you can see in the face he's kind of captured her kind of youth and fear. You know, these are eyes in the headlights of someone else. He's also done some really nice kind of handwork we can see here. So you can see one hand placed on her lap, one dangling over the sofa, and basically just a really nice rendered all-round piece from Shannon. Again, like not mind-blowing, but again, I think for a difficult, like young sitters are more difficult because they tend to be more nervous and trickier to deal with. Okay, we've got another one of the Eleanor Fortescue Brickdale historical pieces. So last time we saw Da Vinci, and now we've got Botticelli's studio. So we're back to Firenze. You can see the fortress here in the background, and this is so Lorenzo the Magnificent, or his father or whatever, greeting Botticelli, bowing down to his power and his might, and you've got his, I think it's his mistress, wasn't it? Because the Medici used one of his mistresses for Venus, for the Botticelli Venus as well. So this is kind of historical because we're kind of seeing what's the imagination, sorry, Eleanor's imagination of of what Renaissance Italy was like, and we're kind of greeted by Botticelli grinding his pigments across down here. You can see he's obviously been working on a kind of a painting in the background, and it's another just nice piece, really well rendered, lots of depth and ability to it. But I still find some of these historical paintings a bit flat. If you want to see a true master of it, take a look at what Leighton does. And again, there's a bit of, I said where Sargent kind of paints in each of these figures and they all feel a bit individual. There's a little bit of that with this kind of work here, where there's an uncanny valley with some of the lighting, and it's hard because rendering something as beautiful as that kind of brocaded skirt or the velvet, but it doesn't feel connected together in the same kind of way. But it's still, I still think, a very high quality historicism painting. So, very, very nice, but not mind blowing again. Okay, speaking of Framptons, we're going back to Reginald Frampton for a nativity here. And if you saw his work, he was right at the end of last year. He does this kind of whatever Macintosh group-esque graphic thing, which again has these kind of like strange live manneresque figures in them, and we've got here everyone giving adoration to the new Christ child who's been born in the manger, and you can see he's been kind of thrown into this little manger filled with hay. Mary praying to him alongside the angels glorifying his name. I like the kind of star in the sky, which has become this gigantic flowers bloom or mushroom bloom in the sky above everyone else. And again, the baby is, I mean, this has got to be tricky. 3/4 foreshortened baby picture. There's a very famous Mantegna painting of Jesus foreshortened in a sort of similar pose, and it's notoriously difficult to do, but Frampton does manage to pull it off. Mary Mother herself, again, there's kind of a simplicity, a tranquility to her, and I enjoy that, and I think it's a nice piece. And then colors wise, it's mainly revolving around like a yellow and blue axis, maybe red and green in the minor, something like that. But yeah, interesting, nice theological painting. Now, another, I'd say, fairly decent piece from Pegram. So if you remember, Pegram is Thornycroft's protege. And he did an okay relief. This piece here is definitely stronger than that. This is an outdoor garden ornament entitled Hylas. Now, the story of Hylas is that he is one of the assistant, or sort of like, again, apprentice is the wrong word, but kind of like he's trained up by Hercules to be a hero. He goes with Hercules as part of being his trip to the Golden Fleece with Jason, so he is an Argonaut as well. But he at some point gets seduced or goes with various sea nymphs. And there's a very famous Waterhouse painting of Hylas sort of sitting down and the nymphs popping out of the water, ready to capture him. And in some accounts of the story, he then gets married with the water nymph. But this is the moment where he's kind of walking along by the seaside, and he's been surprised from being captured. He's been caught out here by our water nymph. Now, I must say, I do really like the Hylas across here. There's a youthfulness and a daintiness to him, so you can tell him to say that he's a youth, but they've really Pegram's really managed to capture the surprise at the same time. You know, he's turning over his shoulder, looking down. But the water spirit is relatively apathetic. It's hard to see in the face here, but she doesn't look that bothered, but she is still dragging him to the ground. I love the kind of the fins from the side of the mermaid here. It's very interesting, very novel, and I think a really nice piece. This is definitely one of Pegram's greater works, and very interesting. Okay, so that is it for 1922. So I would say like an average year, nothing too special in my mind. The Sargent painting's great. I like the Augustus John Bernard Shaw maybe, and then the Anning Bell Sepulchre. Like there was something about this that really caught me, and caught my attention. Those I think were the strongest ones from this year. But I think we'll continue on, find out more pieces next time we speak as we go on to 1923. So please leave a comment in chat with your favorite piece. Tell me what you liked, and I'll see you all next year.